Welcome everyone to the Indian Express of 4th November 2022. I will explain this newspaper in 3 steps. First is why is the news, second is what is the news, and third is what can we expect in the future about the topic that is given in the news. So let's get started with the first headline, which is Imran Khan survives assassination bid. His party blames Pakistan Army, PM. So this news, if we look at it from the perspective of our examination, this news is not important. But as a general reader of newspaper, we see this news is a bit shocking. Why? Because a leader of a country is being shot. So it is a kind of shocking news. So looking from the perspective of examination, this news is important. This is about corruption, how corruption can be fight. Above of amenities and dabav from government feed corruption, must act. So lack of resources and pressure from the government. These two things, Prime Minister Modi is calling off that these two are the reasons for corruption, and we must act in order to get rid of this corruption. So calling for administrative ecosystem with zero tolerance for corruption. So administrative, such an ecosystem of administration where there will be no tolerance for corruption. So he say that these above of amenities, lack of resources and unnecessary pressure from the government, these are the two reasons holding back the progress of the people. So this is holding back progress of the people, because at the end of the day, money from the people's pocket get to these corrupted people, and also this promotes corruption in the country. So I will explain how these two reasons are actually feeding corruption. So first of all, let's try to understand how scarcity feeds corruption. So you see, there are a lot of government welfare schemes that give out money and other resources to people who need it. So there is some kind of lack of resources and demand is very much high. So lack of resources and demand is a lot higher than these resources. So what actually occurs is, in order to get benefit from these schemes, people give some kind of money to the person in order to avail benefits. So this is the reason, in order to get first the benefit of scheme, these people give money, and this promotes corruption. And then there is a government pressure also. So now government is saying that we have been trying to change the system of scarcity and pressure for the last 8 years. The government is trying to fill the gap between supply and demand. So it is trying to maintain, which means demand is not going to reduce unless and until people get off from this state of poverty and from this state of need. So they are trying to make people more stronger in order to be economically uh, independent, and also they are trying to make people self sustained. So this will reduce the demand, and how they will increase the supply by giving more resources. So they are trying to balance this supply and demand. The three ways adopted to achieve this. So there are three ways how this can be achieved: through advancement in technology, and second is taking basic services to saturation levels. So first of all, advancement technology, access to every person to technology so that they can avail benefits from it. You may have seen technology have helped a lot of section of people in the village. You see, now because of technology, people are getting employment, education. So online education, people are learning from YouTube, other platforms. Also they are earning from other platforms like YouTube or other platforms, doing online business, selling on Amazon or anything like that. So this is because of advancement in technology. Second is taking basic services to saturation level. The first and foremost example of this is Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. Also Skill India. These are the schemes that are trying to make people self-sustained. And finally, heading towards Atmanirbharta, which is self-reliance. So making people self-employed, other activities, such kind of things are helping to make people more stronger. So this is the way that they can actually work on the scarcity of resources. So what can we expect in the future? At least a pressure from top of the government in order to reduce the corruption. So his means Prime Minister Modi's say is very very important. Now this is a city page. Next also come the city page. So here one news is important. You may have heard about this genetically modified mustard. This was a seed. So you know mustard is a crop that has seeds in it, and these seeds when pressed using machines or manually they give oil in kind of mustard oil. So what this genetically modified mustard is going to do, it was increasing the size of that seed, which means per seed there will be more oil. So this was going to do that, it was going to increase the oil content that we get from a seed of a mustard. So now Supreme Court has taken a plea against genetically modified mustard. Its release on hold. So these genetically modified mustard were going to be released in environment, which means they were going to be sown and then cut off. Now Supreme Court has stopped this. Why? Because there is a plea against it. And what this plea is about. So this plea is basically about environmental consequences of such a genetically modified crop, because a lot of this is about playing with nature and also increasing the content of crop, but somewhat there is a disturbance which is not natural. So now expert committee has been set up in order to examine the question of these genetically modified crops in India. So this community called HT crops unsustainable. So this is HT, which is herbicide tolerant crops unsustainable, which means these are not a sustainable way of doing agriculture. Also unsuitable for India. They're also talking about that looking at the perspective from India related agriculture and land and its topography. This is not suitable for India. Also, the committee noted that herbicide sprayed on these HT crops caused cancer. So, you see, when the name of cancer comes, it's a big deal. Has recommended that non-GMO alternatives were available in the country. So, instead of using these GM crops, non-GMO alternatives must be recommended, must be given more importance. Also recommended a total ban on all HT crops on precautionary principle, as no long-term safety studies were done on the impact of edible GM crops. So now it has recommended that there must be a total ban on this herbicide tolerant crops, because of the reason that it is unsustainable, unsuitable for India, causes cancer, and other alternatives are available. So why using these HT crops? Because one thing is also there, that studies have not been conducted in order to look at what is the impact of these edible GM crops. So because of lack of study and lack of information, these crops are now recommended to ban this. And taking advice from this committee, Supreme Court has kept the release of this GM crop in hold. Next hearing will be done on November 10th, so we will see what is more regarding this news. Now coming to government and politics page, you see one news is important. India to stress action on climate finance by developed countries. So COP27 is going to come uh, on Sunday. It's going to start on that. So that is why India is trying to make best out of this summit. So what is this news is about? So you see, first of all, I'll explain why is this news. So because there was a time in 18th to 19th century that uh, these countries that are now developed, like USA, Europe, European countries, Canada, these were all doing a massive scale of industrial work in their countries. Now, this massive industrial revolution, which is normally called, this created a lot of pollution in the whole climate of the earth. Now, the developing countries are suffering from it, and now, when the time came that these developing countries started their race towards becoming a developed countries, there is a lot of pressure that if you do a lot of industrial production, you will cause more pollution to the climate. So there was a time when these countries which are now developed, USA, Canada, European countries, these countries, there was a time that these countries have done their entire process of becoming developed. But now when times came for developing countries, there's a lot of pressure on environment. So now, in order to get mitigate from this effect, other developing countries, including India, have called out that you have created the pollution in 18th to 19th century. Now you have to pay for it to the developing countries in order to solve these problems in their own countries, because this pollution is not being created by India. You see, India is also creating a lot of pollution, but the impact of it on climate change must be seen after 15 to 20 years. For example, China is using a lot of coal for its industrial uh, changes and its action. So China is using coal. This is not creating a sudden impact on climate change. It will create impact after 20 to 25 years. But the but the USA and Europe have done this in last centuries, also in 20th centuries. So this impact which we feel now is because of this industrial revolution. So now these countries have to pay for it in order to solve problems in the whole world. So now India will stress on action in climate finance. So this is about action in climate finance. What is decided? It has been decided that developed countries will give $100 billion to developing countries in order to solve this problem. Also technology transfer, which means how this problem will be solved. The developed country have to find technology, have to do research on it, and then transfer this technology to the developing countries so that they can solve this problem. Also capacity building at the upcoming event. So India will discuss all of that. Capacity building means setting up institutions, employing people in order to solve this problem. So climate finance has not been defined. In the absence of a definition, there is no clarity on what it entails. So climate finance has not been defined clearly. What is the price? It has been decided $100 billion, but there can be, in fact there should be, a sub planning, which is where you will invest, how this will be done, whether it is a loan, grant, or anything like that. So there is no clarity on that, how this money will be given. So will climate finance be in form of loans, grants, or subsidies? Will it be private or public financing? All of this should be clearly defined. So these are the problems, which is whether this money is a loan, whether it is a grant, or it will be given in form of subsidy, private, public, how it will be done. So India wants that it should be clearly defined. So India will focus on concessional and climate specific grants, progress towards target of mobilization of $100 billion annually. So how concession will be done? So because India wants to be a developed country, and in order to be developed it has to use natural resources and also other kind of resources. This creates pollution, so whether there will be any concession for India or not. Also climate specific grants, plus how this $100 billion will be mobilized. From mobilized means transferred, so how this $100 billion will be moved away from developed countries to developing countries. This will be discussed. So COP27 is going to start. We will discuss a lot more in the future. Now coming to our next page, this is this is an election page totally, which is not important. Now comes the word page. You see, wanted to kill Imran Khan was misleading public, couldn't tolerate it. This is a statement given by the shooter. That, and there is a total clarification that he is not affiliated to any political, religious or terror outfit. But much is going to come in the future. We will just look at it from general perspective, not it's important with regard to our examination, but just for a common news we will get in touch with it. Okay, so moving forward to economy page. MPC holds a special meet to draft report on inflation target miss. First of all, why is this news? Because for consecutive 3 quarters, which means for consecutive 3 months, 9 months, 3 quarters means 9 months, per quarter is 3 months. So for 9 months total, the inflation was above 6%. It was nearly 6 point some percent, sometimes 7%. So there is a rule, in fact there is a law, that act, that if this monetary this RBI, this Reserve Bank of India, fails to tame the inflation below 6%, then it has to give in writing why it failed. It has to give in writing to the government that why it failed, what was the failure, what was the reasons for the failure. So MPC holds a special meeting to draft report on inflation target miss. So in order to draft this written report, MPC will hold a special meeting. And inflation target miss, you know that there was less than 6% target, but now the target has been missed because inflation was more than 6%. So in order to discuss and draft the content of the report which the RBI has to send to the government for missing the inflation target, what must be written, what were the reasons, all this will be discussed by Monetary Policy Committee, and again this will be sent to the government. The consumer price index or retail index has been above target of 2 to 6% for 3 consecutive quarters or 9 straight months from January to September. You see, this inflation has been above 2 to 6% for 9 months. So that is why they are writing this for the government. Failure in meeting the inflation targets for 3 quarters requires the RBI to write a report to the government explaining the reasons for the failure. This I have been explained that if you fail for taming the inflation, for meeting the inflation target, then you have to write a report in written explaining reasons for the failure. So we don't know whether this report will be out, released or not. This will only we can assure in future. So looking forward, there is no much news in coming pages. Okay, so this gets an end to the newspaper. Now you can read this newspaper by yourself as well.